Back on. Okay, guys, welcome back to our book club, Cooper, third edition, Reading Between the Wines. We are back on motivating operations. So we are in part 6 of the book. So we're getting there. We're now on chapter 16. So now we're going to talk about the difference between behavior altering and value altering. So this little graph gives us a nice little difference between the two, because you can manipulate the motivation to change the value of a reinforcer, or you can also manipulate the MO to change the behavior. And so there's two different, they're two different things. So value altering, this is gonna change the effectiveness of the reinforcer, right? So this is one of our antecedents that we use a lot in ABA is we need to make the reinforcer more motivating. So whatever the case may be, I've actually had a client where was unmotivated by really anything. And I was trying to get him to be motivated by money, and client told me that money is not motivating because his parents' money is basically his money. So money had no value, right? Because he never had to work for it. He just gets it freely, right? And so I put in a target for parents. And we're like, okay, we need to change our behavior in order to make this reinforcer reinforcing. What are we going to have to do? Anybody? We're going to have to no longer provide it freely, right? We have to withhold it. So that's where that satiation and what's the opposite? Deprivation and satiation comes into effect, right? So we are going to deprive them of the free access of money so that it can become motivating, right? So reinforcer establishing effect, an increase in the current effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer. So that's the reinforcer establishing effect. So that's your EO. Okay, so we're talking about the EO. We are going to increase the current effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer. And then you have the AO. We're going to decrease the current effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer. So in order for us to increase the effectiveness of money, we had to use deprivation, right? We had to deprive them of the free access to money in order to increase the effectiveness of money. And then you have the opposite, which would be abolishing effect. And that's the one where satiation comes in. So we're going to give them free access. So we're going to give them lots and lots of whatever the reinforcer is in order to decrease its effectiveness, to make it no longer as reinforcing. Trying to think of an example. I know I've told you guys about my dog, how he's really old and he drinks a lot of water. And it's probably because like his kidneys and, he's got a lot going on. And so I'm like always having to go and fill his bowl, because he's just like never satisfied. And so I go outside, fill the bowl, I come back and sit down to like have a meeting, and then I just hear him outside, oh, oh, oh. And I'm like, what the heck? And so I'm like, okay, you know what? I go out there and I fill up 2 buckets, like big ones, full, like mopping buckets full of water, until he can drown himself. And so after a while, he leaves me alone, right? The reinforcer is like, he's fully satiated, he's full of water, so he leaves me alone. So I'm like, okay, perfect. So that can be an example of using an abolishing effect. It's like I gave him tons and tons, buckets and buckets of water, so it decreased the need for him to be barking at me, and so that was me kind of manipulating the environment so that he would stop bothering me. So that's going to be your reinforcer abolishing effect. We decrease the current effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer. So whenever you guys think, or whenever you see value altering in the exam or in mock questions, think about the EO and the AO. And we're changing the value of the reinforcer by either giving them a lot of it or withholding it, so that it can be more reinforcing. So we use that a lot in ABA as an antecedent to change the effectiveness of a reinforcer. Okay, does anybody have any questions on value altering so far?
So can you use it mainly for with abolishing operation? Is it purposely for behavior reduction? For example, if a child likes to escape or elope, and then you give him consistent breaks, and then it ceases the child being able to elope.
Consistent breaks.
Yeah.
Yes, because
breaks, so that he doesn't even have the urge to go on break, because you're always giving him break.
Yes, because you are decreasing the effectiveness of the reinforcer of elopement. So elopement is no longer reinforcing because she's allowing him access to elopement. Yes. Okay, so then we have behavior altering effect. And that one is going to have the evocative effect and abative effect. So evocative effect is going to be an increase in the current frequency of all behavior that has been reinforced by that stimulus, object, or event. Increase in the current frequency of all behavior that has been reinforced by that. Okay, so basically we're reinforcing it, right? We're reinforcing it a lot, frequently, to increase that behavior. And then abative effect is a decrease in the current frequency of all behavior that has been reinforced by that stimulus, object, or event. Okay, so no longer providing it that reinforcement. And so what I'm thinking here is that value altering is more so an antecedent based strategy, and behavior altering, you're looking more at like consequence, right?
Okay.
That can be the two differences between the two. And so in like the exam or in mocks, you might see stuff like that. So for value altering, we're manipulating the MO. Behavior altering, you're probably going to be messing with the consequence. Okay, so let's read what Cooper tells us about it. So food deprivation is an EO that increases the effectiveness of food. So we're going to be withholding food to make food more reinforcing. So it's going to have a value altering effect and evokes all behavior that has been reinforced by food. Okay, so it's like both of them go hand in hand, right? So you deprive them of this, and so then it evokes the behavior that has been reinforced by food. So because you manipulated the EO, it changed the reaction, or it changed the behavior. So you increased and then evoked all behavior reinforced by food. In other words, after not having food for a while, food becomes a reinforcer, and behaviors such as looking for food are increased. Okay, so you did both at the same time, basically. Food ingestion, so consuming food, is an AO that decreases the effectiveness of a reinforcer, of food as a reinforcer. Value altering effect, it abates all behavior that has been followed by food reinforcement, behavior altering. In other words, after eating, the reinforcing effectiveness of food is decreased and also is looking for food, along with other previously learned behaviors that have produced food. Okay, so in Peace's example, with the giving them frequent breaks, so she is satiating them, right? So she's giving them lots and lots of breaks, which is the AO. So she's giving him lots of breaks, decreasing the effectiveness of elopement or escape, decreasing the effectiveness of escape as a reinforcer. And so then value altering, it's going to abate. So it's going to decrease. It's going to decrease all behaviors that have been followed by escape reinforcement. So in that case, elopement. Did that help to break it down? So because she manipulated the antecedent, she also was able to abate all behaviors that have been reinforced by escape, which was the elopement in her case. So maybe if you guys think about it like that and try to break it down, will help to make sense. Oh, this one is nice. So you can basically put anything into this little scenario. Do you guys want to try? Is there a way to zoom out? Oops. Oops, I just zoomed it more. Oops. I'm trying to zoom out and it's just zooming me in. Does anybody have a scenario that they want to try and see what the value altering and behavior altering effect is? I can't figure out how to zoom out.
Try to click the A. You see the little A and the big A? I think that may
Is
work.
that it?
Oh, no.
Text size?
That may...
Oh, maybe.
Oh, it worked.
Yeah, it just made the text smaller. But that's good. We were able to see both. Okay, does somebody want to try? We use this in ABA for everything. So think about really any situation. Peace gave a good example with escape. What about, we can try like an attention. So let's say the behavior is motivated by attention. So how are we going to make attention okay, let's say client screams for attention, and it's because he's used to everybody turning around when he screams, right? So client screams for attention. So instead, we're going to provide him with high levels of attention so that he doesn't need to engage in the screaming. Let's see. Okay, so we are going to provide him with high levels of attention. Okay, I'm not even gonna try because my brain is not going and you guys are not helping me, so I'm gonna keep going. Okay, isolating value and behavior altering effect. The value altering effect of an MO influences the potency of a reinforcer to increase the future frequency of that behavior. An MO's value altering effect is observed when the manipulation of certain environmental variables affects the speed in which the organism acquires new behaviors that produce the relevant consequence. In this way, an MO directly changes the potency of reinforcers or punishers to increase and maintain or decrease and eliminate behavior. The value of a reinforcer may also vary depending on specific response requirements. One way to access the potency of a specific reinforcer is to use a progressive ratio schedule in which response requirements increase after delivery of each reinforcer. Okay, kind of like shaping. Behavior altering effect is interpreted as the change in frequency due to the organism's behavior contacting reinforcement, implying that this change occurs only after the reinforcer has been obtained. However, a strong relation exists between the level of the MO and the responding under extinction when no reinforcers are being received. Okay. Early research, Skinner, 1938, showed that rats that had learned to press a lever to obtain food when exposed to an extinction condition at different levels of deprivation pressed the lever at different rates according to their levels of deprivation. So that's pretty cool, right? So you can change the frequency of the behavior all by manipulating the MO. So because they haven't ate in a long time, the rats, they are pressing the lever more frequently because they want more food. Versus if we had just fed them and they're full, they're probably not going to engage in that behavior of pressing the lever as frequently because they're already full. So because you were able to change the value of the reinforcer, you were also able to change the frequency that they engage in the behavior, which is basically what we do in ABA. This is just putting it in very, very technical terms. But if you want somebody outside to understand, like a parent, for example, you'll have to be able to explain this stuff. Like for the example with me, with the situation with the money, I had to teach parents about reinforcement and how we have to modify our behavior to change the effectiveness of a reinforcer by either withholding it or by giving it freely. So by giving it freely, reinforcer is not reinforcing because he has so much of it and free access to whatever, buys whatever he wants on Amazon. The card is just there. Versus if I say, hey, I'm taking my card off Amazon and you got to earn your own money to get whatever you want, then it's going to change his behavior, right? Whatever behavior we want the person to engage in, which is doing their chores, so that the money can become reinforcing for chores, we have to withhold the access to that reinforcer. So it's all very scientific and behavioral and really cool. I love this stuff and I love like explaining it and like seeing it in like different situations and scenarios. So if you guys are confused with this stuff, then do what I just did and put any situation like into the like scenario and see like, okay, is this an EO or an AO? What am I doing to the antecedent? Am I satiating him or am I using deprivation? Okay, cool. Now what's happening to the behavior? Am I increasing the frequency of it or am I decreasing the frequency of it? So that will kind of help you guys to understand it. And once you're able to break down different things, means that you truly understand, right?
Yeah. I have a comment, Sally.
Uh-huh.
Can we ever be associated with money?
With money?
Yeah. As human beings, can we ever be associated and say, I don't want the money, so I'm going to engage in this behavior?
Satiated with money? I don't know. I don't think so. I guess it would depend on the person. Like maybe you're so rich that money is not even reinforcing. It doesn't make you happy anymore and you just want a friend. Maybe. I don't know.
Think about that.
I've never had enough access to that much money to say like, oh no, that's too much money. I've had enough.
Well, that with it being like the generalized condition reinforcer, is that what makes it more resistant to satiation?
I guess so, yeah. Because it's something that we just might want forever or need forever, right? Maybe you don't necessarily want it so bad, but you need it because you have to eat and have clothes and a house, and so maybe it'll be hard to satiate somebody with money. But you could do the opposite. You could withhold the money and then it becomes more reinforcing and then change their behavior.
Maybe for a short period, you can get satiated, you can just ignore it and engage in the behavior. For instance, if you are so tired and then your boss says, oh, come for extra hour and I'll pay you this, Charlie, keep the money, I'm tired. I need that break, no matter what, how much you give me, I don't care, I need that break.
Oh yeah,
and that situation,
true.
I think we can do.
Yeah, that's a good one. You can make them so tired that money is not reinforcing at that moment. Yeah, that's true. He's like, I don't care about money right now. I just need a nap.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another little scenario where they break it down for us. So MO is food deprivation. So somebody is hungry, right? Hasn't had food in a while. SD, friend with a backpack. Behavior, asks for food. Conditioned reinforcer, sight of food. Unconditioned reinforcer, food. Okay. So this one had an indirect. This one had an indirect evocative effect, the SD. And then the behavior had a direct evocative effect. And then an indirect establishing effect was the conditioned reinforcer. And the direct establishing effect was the unconditioned reinforcer. So food deprivation directly establishes food as a reinforcer. So boom, because we deprived him of food, we directly change the effect of food, value altering effect, and evokes food seeking behaviors, which is the behavior altering effect. Food deprivation indirectly establishes the effectiveness of all conditioned reinforcers correlated with food. Value altering and indirectly affects the salience of the discriminative stimulus correlated with food, behavior altering effect. It can get confusing, so you guys gotta really study it and break it down, but also don't get too into it. So remember, we've talked about that, like don't confuse yourself too much. Try to break it and make it into the most simplest explanation, and don't go too crazy like, oh, but what if this? And because then you start confusing yourself. And we do that a lot. Okay, behavior altering versus function altering effects. Michael used the term repertoire altering effect and function altering effect to classify operations, example reinforcement, that would change the future probability of an organism's behavior, as well as alter the function of stimuli. Both MOs and SDs are antecedent variables that have behavior altering effects. Antecedents can evoke or abate responses, but their occurrence does not alter the organism's functional behavioral repertoire. Thus, as antecedent variables, MOs alter the current frequency of all behaviors relevant to that MO. For example, a difficult task may serve as an establishing operation that momentarily increases all behaviors that have in the past produced removal of tasks. Presenting a difficult task to a child who has learned that tantrums often result to postponement or removal is likely to produce a tantrum evocative effect. Conversely, if the task is not presented or made easier, an abolishing operation, then the likelihood of tantrums is diminished, abative effect. However, as an intervention strategy, the removal of the task does not alter the child's repertoire. It only momentarily abates behavior, and that would otherwise occur if the motivating variables, difficult tasks, were in place. In other words, the child would not behave differently in the presence of difficult tasks solely as a result of antecedent manipulation. So what we're saying is that manipulating your antecedent can only do so much, right? It will change the frequency of the behavior in that moment. But what about the future, right? So what if we're trying to increase it forever, or get rid of it forever? that's where consequences come in, right? So thus reducing or eliminating the MO for a specific problem behavior is a temporary rather than permanent solution. The MO is again in place, the problem behavior may reoccur. Nonetheless, in eliminating environmental conditions that contribute to the occurrence of problem behavior may be necessary, especially when those conditions are improvised or aversive. So let's think about a child who elopes. So child engages in elopement behaviors. So this is why, as a BCBA, it's your job to make sure that you have antecedent-based strategies and consequence-based strategies. Because what happens if I manipulated the classroom so that he wouldn't be able to run away because, so I positioned him a little bit further from the door. And you're like, okay, I'm all done. I've been his BCBA and I am a winner. But then what happens when he runs out the door, right? So your antecedent-based strategies, they're to help, but you always have to put a consequence-based strategy as well, because he might still run out that door and you need to figure out what they're gonna do as a consequence. So antecedent-based strategies, are you using your proactive strategies? You're like, okay, we're gonna manipulate the classroom so that he sits further from the door. Or we're gonna close the door so that it makes it harder because now he has to turn the knob in order to get out. Or we're going to give him frequent breaks from work, or we're going to make his work a little bit easier so he won't have to run away. All of those are your antecedent-based strategies, but you also want to make sure that you have a consequence-based strategy, because what happens if all that stuff that you guys did doesn't work and he still runs out the door? So consequence-based strategies are also very important. But this chapter is basically telling us like how important the MO is, and all of those proactive strategies. They can also help to influence the behavior. So even though this is an example of manipulating the MO, task difficulty, the same argument applies to manipulation of SDs. If problem behavior is more likely to occur in the presence of dad SD and not in the presence of mom, so SDS delta. So whenever I see dad, I engage in more problem behaviors because maybe dad spoils me and I know that I can. But in the presence of mom, I know that tantruming is not going to work because she doesn't pay attention to me or something like that. So removing dad from the room, which would be the SD, would temporarily reduce the frequency of problem behavior. But when dad returns, the child is likely to misbehave again. So that wouldn't really solve your problem, right? So if parents came to you like, hey, he has a lot of tantrums with dad and not any tantrums with mom. And you're like, okay, dad, leave the room, then that solves our problem. They're like, okay, well, dad can't leave the room all the time. So you have to also come up with some type of consequence to influence the behavior as well.
Can you please explain the SD delta a little for me?
SDS delta?
Yeah.
So SD signals that reinforcement is available, and S delta signals that reinforcement is not available. So they're saying that the problem behavior is more likely to occur in the presence of dad. And this happens a lot. And it's because he sees his daughter crying and he's like, oh, my baby. And so he goes and gives her attention, right? So she knows I'm going to get that reinforcement of attention from dad. So dad is my SD. So every time dad is in the room, I'm going to scream and have a big tantrum because I know that I'm going to get that attention from dad. Versus when I
Okay.
see mom, if I engage in that screaming tantrum behavior, she's not going to pay attention to me because she's used to it. And so she just keeps on washing the dishes. So mom is an S delta, signaling that reinforcement is not available.
Okay. Okay. Thank
And
you.
so here it's telling us like you can do the same thing where you manipulate the SD, but it'll only be a temporary solution. It's not going to fix their problems at home. You know what I mean? Like, so if you're just trying to get rid of the tantrum in that moment, get dad out of the room. Cool. We got rid of the tantrum because dad's gone. But what's going to happen in the future when they're at home? So temporary fixes are those antecedent manipulations. So that's what it's telling us, that changing the SDS delta is only going to be a temporary fix. I hope that helped.
Perfectly. Thanks.
An individual's quality of life may be threatened by socially improvised and/or extremely aversive environments, which may lead to the development of attention and escape maintain problem behaviors. In addition to being an ethically necessity, improving the environment would reduce current problem behaviors and help prevent its future occurrence. Okay. Consequences that can change the organism's repertoire, enabling the organism to behave differently in the future. Thus, consequences have function-altering effects. This is probably the most important sentence of your whole entire life. This is how I know what's the difference between antecedent-based strategies and consequence-based strategies. So remember we talked about for antecedents, they had value altering and behavior altering effects. So that's cool. Value altering, I need to change the value sometimes. Behavior altering, I want to change the frequency of the behavior. But what about consequences? So consequences, they're going to be those really strong ones that have the function altering effects. So anytime you see like consequence, something in your exams and your mocks, those are going to be your function altering effects. What are some function altering effects? Those are going to be your reinforcers, your punishers. So these variables include reinforcers, punishers, and the occurrence of a response without its reinforcer, so extinction, or without its punisher, recovery from punishment procedures. Consequences alter the future frequency of whatever behavior immediately precedes those consequences. In the previous example, if task removal or reduction of a difficult task is made contingent upon the child asking for a break or help, the frequency of these behaviors would increase under similar conditions in the future. In other words, the child's functional repertoire is changed and he or she can engage in two new responses, asking for a break or asking for help. So that is, that's what we want to do, right? We want to use our differential reinforcement. So we are no longer going to provide reinforcement for the screaming. Instead, we're going to reinforce the little girl for asking for up. So let's say the reason why dad and mom, remember the situation where we talked about dad and mom, dad SD, mom as delta. We can teach dad to require her to request up in the presence of him instead of engaging in a tantrum in order for him to go and pick her up and hug her and stuff like that. And that will change the behavior the future frequency of the behavior. So now she's like, oh, I don't have to scream anymore. I just have to ask for up or put my hands up, and then he'll pick me up. Okay, does anybody have any questions on those? Difference between ORs and SDs. I think it confuses me to go on this side. What page was I on? Okay, we haven't talked about that. Or did we? I'm so confused. I just went all the way back. Okay, so next week we'll go into the conditioned motivating operation, I think, and the UMOs. Behavior altering versus function altering. Okay, we did that. And then the next one is this one. Okay, so next week we'll go into distinguishing between MOs and SDs, unconditioned motivating operations, MOs for punishment, the multiple effects of MOs, and then we'll go into CMOs and all of that, all of the different MOs. Let me see.